Bitcoin has lost a lot of momentum over the past week and has been a very exhausting range for the bulls, but the Elliott Wave Theory can still provide us clarity within the markets and how we can puzzle in the shorter to medium timeframes into the macro timeframes. In the previous video, we discussed why the bullish idea was weakening and why there was a stronger case for the bearish scenarios, and we will recap if there even is any bullish scenarios left, but more importantly, we will discuss the continued narrative on how the current range is going to be resolved as a possible wave X before further downside, which is my preferred scenario at the current time of recording before we actually move to the upside. Welcome back to another Bitcoin Elliott Wave analysis, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't already, I kindly ask you to hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel if you would like more Bitcoin updates. Thank you very much. Now, getting straight into the analysis, please make sure to watch this whole video because there is a lot of things to cover here. The X wave is going to be the ultimate resolving case here for what could be a possible move to the downside. But first, let's recap on why the bearish or the bullish scenario rather is looking less and less likely in terms of this immediate low being protected at the current time of recording. First of all, we talked about a possible impulse to the upside, which we didn't achieve, and in between that update for the video, we did also some social media updates on talking about a possible leading diagonal that could be being created here. Now, this idea is losing a lot of momentum as we are now also entering right now at the current time of recording into the $84,000 range, and that does lose its structure quite a bit for the contracting nature of how this should be built. So in order to create a contracting diagonal, we need to create a series of threes. The move off the low here from $78,000 was deemed as a three-wave move into a wave one. And this move down, again, it was questionable. I talked about this on social media on why this is not a possible three-wave move. We're really forcing a lot of bias into this for a bearish bullish scenario. And this move up here, while there was a chance for this to create a contracting nature to the upside, still wasn't able to hold. We got another pullback here, and right now, even with yesterday's price action where we were moving sideways, there was another chance for it to move up, and right now all we're doing is adjusting this bottom trend line, and the further we continue to adjust this trend line, we start to lose the overall look for how this diagonal can be created. But the most important thing about this diagonal idea and why it's losing so much strength is not just because it's a valid scenario, it's the only remaining valid scenario if we're really remaining objective to the wave counts. Because like I said, we had a three-way move off the lows, and the only mode of structure going forward for a possible bullish continuation to create a higher degree wave one was going into a three-wave move of a wave one of this diagonal. And we were just waiting as the markets were really kind of exhaustively moving sideways to create at least one more move to the upside above $95,000. But bulls are still continuing to fail on creating that high that we really needed for how this contracting nature was going to be created for this diagonal. But we're not creating that. We're also, right now, we're adjusting this trend line basically with only hope, and hope doesn't work in this market, ladies and gentlemen. We're working with the lowest probability pattern for how this wave one could have been created, let alone assuming that even a five-wave move to the upside for this wave one of the diagonal, we were still looking for a wave 1-2 pullback of a confirmation that puts us right back into the range before an ultimate confirmation for a wave three. And in my opinion, this is all just assumed. This is not even based on time. This is just trying to keep the best look of how this is going to be playing out. Ideally, usually time, it does come into a factor here, and I would even assume that a wave 1-2 pullback was going to extend in time, and that would really extend how this wave 5 is going to be compared to this wave 3-4 and this wave 2 most notably. So with that being said, this bullish idea is probably right now at a 5% probability if I had to really label it. So there's really no other bullish continuation other than a possible bounce for a wave X, and that leads me into the second scenario, which is a possibility of having this wave X coming into play as the range or transitional wave before we look for further downside. Now, can this wave X go higher? Yes, absolutely. But first, let's talk about if in the case that Bitcoin were to move down fast. That would be a possible X wave that has now just completed, where we created a possible range here as a X wave triangle. Now this X wave can be any corrective move, and it can really doesn't matter in terms of the time, as long as we're just creating a partner leg for this wave Y and we have a ABC to the downside that can fulfill creating a multiple zigzag against this. Then there's a possibility, a high possibility that is, that we're going to be going down and further retesting the lower sub 70K regions, possibly going into even the 60K regions. So this is just one possible scenario. Doesn't have the best look right now, in my opinion. I think that we can further range to create a longer wave X before we move to the downside. But again, that still doesn't fit into the bullish narrative, ladies and gentlemen. A bounce here is all just part of the liquidity that we're looking for, because it is now officially support turned resistance, and every time we come back up we have been rejected. So there is a very strong chance that this is going to be acting as major resistance for quite some time and actually just kind of ranging. So that brings me into the second scenario, which is the possibility of a larger range, which can be really narrowed down to a lot of sub variations on how this wave X could be created. One idea is this possibility where we're creating an ABC flat going into this wave X, meaning that we create a new price extreme below this wave here of this wave W, and then we create a 5-wave move up once again, and then we come back into that support turned resistance level, and then we look for another ABC to the downside, possibly reaching us into that lower 60 or 70K and then upper 60K regions as well. So that's the next scenario. And then we also have another possibility of creating even more ranging here. If we're really just continuing on the idea that the range is going to be going on for the next week or so, market sentiment is at its lowest right now, and no one's really going into the markets. Everyone's sitting on their hands, not pressing the buy button. So we may just be ranging here. Even range traders right now are not really taking consideration of this range to be a tradable place. So with that being said, this triangle can just be continuing to extend as a wave X of this wave X. So if that happens, then there's a possibility that we can also come back up, get one more liquidity sweep, as we arguably haven't hit that 61.8% or that 78.6% zone. So that's going to be another liquidity sweep. Once again, the same idea revolves around the idea that this is a support turn resistance zone, and then we're going to look for another partner leg to the downside for this wave Y. So that is the 3, 4 scenarios, I guess, that we can be talking about for how wave X is going to be created. But if we take into consideration of all the scenarios lined up, all of them still lead to the downside of around the lower to the upper 70K regions as an ultimate target, as we're now looking for a completed move or a partner leg against this wave W, as we need to resolve this range to be creating a wave Y. So all we're doing right now in the next video, possibly going into the next video that is that we're just creating a wave X. This wave X can be ultimately resolved right now as a possible triangle, or we could be working for one more low to the high, and that still would be creating a wave X region, and we would be ultimately, even if we're not going to break another low here and go into another price extreme, we have 2 lows here as well that we have to take into consideration. It can still just be a double zigzag to the upside before we actually go down. So what's most important, ladies and gentlemen, to summarize, we're not talking about here to find the exact pinpoints on where these internal counts are going to be supported, because that is pretty much what a lot of people are expecting. They're trying to find an exact bottom and exact top. But the most important thing about the Elliott Wave Theory is working with the medium time frames like we have here for the 4-hour time frame. What's most important is that we have 2 major confluence zones. One is a possible confluence zone that has now resolved as a possible triangle, or we may be working for one more X wave to the upside that is going to be considered a liquidity sweep going into a major Fibonacci level, and then we work to the downside. But ultimately, we're looking for a larger wave Y to the downside. That is the highest probability right now. Now, right now, a lot of you are asking, is there really any way to fit in a bullish scenario? I don't think so, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, this wave 4 is looking very unlikely at this point, where we originally anticipated a possible ABC to the downside to complete this as a major termination point. I think right now, what is fitting into the narrative is that for the WXY scenario, in order to complete it and put it into a major bullish perspective, as you can see, the further you zoom out, it is the only way that we can fit into a bullish narrative. If we're going to be looking for another high, we need another shorter time frame low in order to continue the narrative. So if you follow me on social media, I've discussed this, and the only way we can do this is have an extended wave 5. Now, there is a lot of merit for this idea. In fact, I think the logic versus what the heart wants in terms of what the overall scenario is going to be, there is still a lot of merit for a bullish scenario. We just need one more shorter time frame resolvement, get back that market sentiment that we really need, and then we can continue to the upside. But in that regard, we really need one more low in order to continue to the upside for a wave 3. So that would be fitting if this is going to be a WXY. We're assuming that this 5-wave move has completed and we're working in an intermediate degree wave 1-2 to the upside. Now, there are also other scenarios where we may be just working in a 1-2-1-2, and then this may be another 1-2 in the making. But that right now is low in probability, but that's still something to keep in consideration as we start to move up on the larger macro timeframes as we have here. But the most important thing is this idea as a possible diagonal is just starting to lose its validity. Again, we really, if there is some kind of miracle that happens in the next 5 minutes or so, then there's a possibility that we could still be working in the diagonal, but we're continuing to adjust it. We just got to work the probabilities right now, and I think that is the lowest probability as we speak. Now, there is a bearish scenario that can be fitted as well, that can just completely entirely end this correction, or further this correction, that is, as again, we have a 5-way move to the upside completed into a wave 1, and if this is not a WXY, this is just going to be fitted as a possible impulse to the downside into a wave 1, and this wave 2 could be alternatively in play as well. And if we further move down into this range here of this $60,000 region, that can also be turning into a wave 3, and at that point we won't really know because this can be an ABC or WXY going into wave 3. We'll get a pretty clear picture once we start getting into these regions here, and then there's a very good possibility we're still going to get a bounce at that region there. But again, ladies and gentlemen, we just still have to be very careful and cautious here. If we're really going to be retaining to a bullish scenario, we have to fit that into a WXY scenario that calls for one more possible low. As you can see, 3 scenarios are still leading us to the downside. Even with a wave X that still comes up here for a liquidity sweep, we're looking for a wave Y to the downside into the mid 60s, low mid 60s. I don't really care at that point. We're just looking for an ABC to the downside, and that is how we're going to be concluding this analysis, ladies and gentlemen. Just to conclude that this diagonal has lost a lot of its merit, a continued adjustment. Really, you're now working with the least scenario of a possible expanded diagonal, but that is also very low in probability of the diagonals. So we're out of scenarios for the bullish scenario. We need one more low, ladies and gentlemen. Even if we come back to the upside, that's how it is. Now, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. For the range traders, you may have a chance for another X wave to the upside, but that is really the last opportunity for a possible support turn resistance liquidity sweep before further downside. And if that doesn't happen, then we're going to be looking for another move to the downside right now as a possible resolved triangle that just completed. So we have a few scenarios, and hopefully by next week we'll have a pretty clear answer, and probably we'll be doing our analysis over here. I'll be happy to be wrong. It doesn't really matter to me, as I'm just taking this by day and probability by probability, but right now the probabilities lie into the favor of a medium time frame bearish perspective. Thank you very much. Hopefully that was helpful. If you are interested in joining the Discord membership, we do offer a Discord membership where I do more timely updates and do a final bias update. And I also do a Patreon membership update as well 2 times a week. Also, I'll see you Patreon members on Wednesday with another video update. Thank you very much. Please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a fantastic rest of the weekend and going into Monday. Bye-bye.